Get started with the recording. So once again, welcome to Women in Writing, a conversation with Susan Hubbard, Deborah Keene, and Monique DeMary. We're so happy and pleased that you are here to join us today. This conversation is being put on by the Writers Studio at the University of Chicago Graham School, a place where you can hone your craft and tell your story. The Writers Studio at the University of Chicago is home to a community of writers and instructors passionate about the written word. We hold classes, events, and certificate programs and connect writers of all genres and ability levels in creative and effective writing. This is one of our monthly public events for our students, instructors, and our larger community. We're so pleased that you were able to join us today and hope that this conversation and others like it will encourage you to take some of our courses and come and learn and be in community with us at the Writers Studio. Today's conversation is being moderated by Susan Hubbard, who is one of the Writers Studio's very own. And so I'm going to start us off with a brief introduction of Susan's biography, and then we are going to have her welcome our two guests today who have both been students in the Writers Studio programs. Susan Hubbard draws on a background in film and a lifelong obsession with reading to apply innovative approaches to story. Over 10 years of teaching at the Writers Studio, she has worked with writers of fiction, creative nonfiction, and screenplays to sharpen and enhance their work through an awareness of craft and a focus on audience experience. Her signature courses include writing for emotional impact, structure and scene, building tension, and writing to convince, a course that explores how to incorporate writers' strongly held personal beliefs into memorable themes. Susan's writing credits include award-winning screenplays Fat Chance and Torched, and a split pillow feature production, Realization. 2 short films she wrote and directed, Lessons for Girls and Skin Deep, screened at festivals in the US and abroad. Her 10-minute play, Thundersnow, was staged in 2015 at Chicago's American Theater Company Big Shoulders Festival. She holds an MFA in film and video from Columbia College, Chicago. Susan, thank you so much for agreeing to facilitate today's conversation. I will turn it over to you for further introduction.
Thank you, Conway. We're here today with Monique DeMary and Deborah Keene. Both Writers Studio students have brought work they worked on in the Writers Studio to publication. Monique's biography, Finding the Dragon Lady, The Mystery of Vietnam's Madame Nhu, was published in 2013. Madame Nhu was South Vietnam's first lady before the 1963 coup sanctioned by the US government overturned the South Vietnamese government and initiated what became the US's 10-year involvement in the Vietnam War. President JFK reportedly said she, Madame Nhu, was responsible. That expletive deleted person stuck her nose in and boiled up the whole situation down there, he reportedly said. Madame Nhu was described by David Halberstam as beautiful but diabolic, and another journalist, Malcolm Brown, as the most dangerous enemy a man can have. Monique tracked down Madame Nhu 30 years after the coup when she was living in exile in Paris and eventually convinced her to talk about her experiences, the first interviews that Madame Nhu had given to a Westerner in more than 20 years. Over the course of the next several years, those interviews and other research into primary source materials became Monique's book, Finding the Dragon Lady. Deborah Winfrey Keene is an Illinois native, a former criminal defense attorney, parole and probation officer, and legal educator in Michigan. She graduated from Southern Illinois University with a degree in criminal justice administration and took a position with the Michigan State Appellate Defender's Office, where she litigated appeals for indigent clients for 10 years. She also led the Lansing Community College paralegal program and taught there herself for many years. She moved back to Chicago to be closer to family, and in 2017 discovered the Writer's Studio, where she took her first course with me and began what would become her novel, Devorah Spring. It's about a woman incarcerated for nearly 30 years who gets out of prison and makes it her mission to track down her missing daughter and brother. Devorah Spring is a searing exploration of the criminal justice system, the child foster care system, mental illness, and the difficulties former inmates face in adjusting to life after prison. Deborah published Devorah Spring in January of this year. Congratulations to you both and welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I'm great to see all of you here today joining us for this conversation. And Monique and Deb, I want to specifically focus on your experience as writers, specifically as women writers. So let's start right off with how the two of you came to writing. Amongst all the other things that you were doing in your lives, what made you commit to these particular stories?
Well,
Deborah,
I'll start.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll
Go ahead.
start. I've always liked writing, and as an attorney and as a parole probation officer, I've always written. And with the story that I chose to write here, Devorah Spring, I remember when I first came to your class, and I was just kind of puzzled. Okay, we're doing fiction. What am I to write about? And you said, write something you know. So I said, I actually know this subject really well. And it's something that I've always been passionate about because I have, over the years, had so much up close and personal contact with people in the system, and as clients, as well as coworkers and people in the various agencies that I worked through, whether it was the prisons or the courts or the mental health kind of providers, that kind of thing. So that's why I chose this, because I always wanted to kind of tell the story of the people who I worked with over the years.
And they're very, very intense stories. I mean, this story is a very intense exploration of what it's like to be in prison and to be in that system. As you said, you wanted to get out to the world just what it's like, this system, and what it's like to be trapped in it. And it really is an up close and personal account of that from a very inside point of view. And it clearly comes from your work all those years with people like your protagonist. It comes through so strongly. And Monique, what made you want to work on Madame New? What drew you to this story?
Well, I think I was a failed academic. So I got my master's degree in East Asian Studies. And when that ended, it was sort of typical. People went to their PhD, and I knew that probably wasn't the right path for me. So I was in Boston at the time, and I went to the Boston Public Library because in all of my Vietnamese history classes, I had been fascinated by just the mentions of this dragon lady, was what they called her, which is a totally loaded term. So I'm just putting that out there. I know it is, but I'm calling her that sort of purposefully and acknowledging that it was a loaded term, which is why I started digging into it. And the only things that I could find written about her were sort of footnotes, or they were all written by white men. So I just got curious, like, where did this woman go? And so I logged on to the, Copley Square computers. And when I did a search for her, anything recent, the only thing I could find was that in the 1980s, her parents were murdered by her brother in Georgetown. So I was like, well, this is Shakespearean. Forget a PhD. I'm going to just dive into this. So it took me a really long time, but I didn't know I was going to be a writer. When I was a little girl, I would have told you I dreamed of being a writer because I love to read. Maybe when I really grow up, I'll write fiction, because I think that is the hardest and most wonderful artistic thing that I could aspire to do. But right now, I write narrative nonfiction.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that both of you chose to tell stories that probably had mostly been told from the point of view of male authors. Certainly you had said the Vietnam War was definitely like the purview of male authors, and so virtually everything that was written was about them. And you made a comment to me that, here was this major figure, Madame New, whom JFK, she was so important that JFK actually called her out in comments about the coup in Vietnam. and how important women were in Vietnam at that time as well. It wasn't just the men. And also it's from Deb's point of view, from what she was working on, we're talking about the prison system. And if you think about it, until very, very recently, most of what the public understood about that mainly had to do with male experience and male writers. So, Orange is the New Black came along a few years ago. But I think that was really I think it was such a huge success because it was talking about women's specific experience in prisons. And that comes through in your book so well, that those relationships that your main character had in prison and then out, how strongly female connected they were. And that the strongest people in her lives, your main character's life, both inside and outside of prison, ended up in her strongest allies, ended up being women. So I think it's fascinating that both of you are talking about a loaded term. When you talk about, the dragon lady and this diabolical, all of these ways of talking about your character that are from sort of a male fantasy point of view, if you will, and with almost zero perspective on women inmates. It's interesting to me that both of you, that was the material that drew you. It was stories that had not been told from this sort of more empathetic view that I think both of you brought to your works. So that is fascinating.
Yeah, with me, I think the other thing, I just want to kind of dovetail on what you're saying. With me, as I was preparing for today, I thought about how the vast majority of people who I worked with were men.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my clients, most of my clients, both as a parole officer and later as a criminal defense attorney, they were men. But for whatever reason, because I really did want to tell the story of some of how a woman experienced this. Because as I was thinking back on it, I thought about how I seemed to, even though I had like I said, 90% of the clients were men, with women, it was not unusual for them to sometimes bring their children to the office. And I kind of saw them interact with their children and how it was such another portion of their life that I didn't see with men. And I'm not suggesting that men did not have relationships with their children, but I saw the women as more complete, complete people. I saw them as real people with real lives. And okay, not only did they have to deal with me and go through what I was sort of requiring them to do, they had actual family responsibilities. They had children to feed. And then when I would go visit them at their home, I saw where their children slept, and sometimes they were not the best situations. And so I think that probably that's why I chose to kind of highlight the experience of women in the correctional kind of system.
Yeah, and it's really a driving force for your character that she's got to find her spring, her daughter's spring.
Mm-hmm.
And even though as she faces so many challenges outside when she gets released, and she backslides and she falls back into some unhealthy patterns, many of which have to do with her mental illness, which if you think about it, it's her experience in the foster care system where this mental illness first started to emerge. And it was, as one of her psychiatrists later says, that's somehow the only way that she could deal with the extreme stress that she was under at the age of 10, within the foster care system. And so she backslides, but throughout all of this, every time she backslides, she rallies again. And it's that daughter, it's the quest to find her missing daughter that she hasn't seen since she went into prison. Because of course, back in the portion we're talking about, there was there were not computers, and there was limited availability to these computers for the inmates. So the centrality of family and her connection to her daughter in particular is a huge thematic and very valuable and engrossing thematic angle on your book.
Okay.
Let's see. So let's talk about, I mean, Monique, right now you are working on another book about another figure in that same Vietnam coup era of 1963. And this time it's a male, a real life male person who was working for the CIA, kind of in a shadowy capacity. I think you say in some of the excerpts that I've seen that, you know, if this goes down the tubes, you know, the State Department's going to disavow any knowledge of you. And you talked about the difficulty of writing a male character. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm really struggling with this one, which is why I'm back in classes trying to puzzle my way through and how to see how this character is going to work. But he is the character who, you know, he didn't officially pull the trigger, but he was the American who bears most responsibility for knocking off Madame New's family. So that was kind of how I got led to him. But wow, getting in his head, I'm comparing it to Madame New. They both lived in, you know, another time period. It's, you know, I'm using my imagination a lot, but with Madame New, I could really connect to her sense of being a mother. That was such a part of her. And I'm having a hard time, I think, connecting to my latest character because he had 7 kids that he was not a part of raising. So it's really hard for me to wrap my head around the kind of man that he was. And I do think that he had some really interesting good sides to him, as all human beings do. But yeah, it's a trickier question. And he had, you know, 5 wives, one of who was named Monique as well. So there are definitely points of entry for me. And if maybe if I do fictionalize it, I'll come back as one of his wives or something. But I think if I could find my way into his head a little better. But again, for Madame New, it was really, I was a new mom. I could really relate to that experience of, I'm just trying to protect my kids. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about your writing process. And, you know, what you found to be some of the greatest challenges, maybe not only in the actual writing, and let's stick with that for a bit. Let's talk about, you know, as you're developing your material, and it takes, you know, years most times, where were your allies? Who were your beta readers? Who were the forces? What were the forces that helped you? And did you find that there were any exclusions that you suffered, maybe perhaps because you were a woman or not, or maybe there were opportunities because you were a woman? I'm going to talk about a little bit about allies and obstacles maybe in your process of writing, if you would.
Okay, I can say that taking the classes at the Graham School actually really helped me because I suddenly had a captive audience that, you know, you're sharing work, you're getting feedback, and the teachers were all really good, but it was some of the people in my classes, my beta readers were actually all women. I don't know if that was mostly the makeup of the class or just who I turned to for feedback, but they were all women. And some of the stories that I used to like figure out the structure of my book, often were women writers as well, which I don't know if that's just serendipity. I don't know what there is to that, but certainly my writing process is slow, and I do need feedback, and almost more importantly, I need accountability, because if it's just me, I have a really hard time like turning down my kids or, whatever it is, and saying, I'm working on this now, but I can be accountable to a class of people. So for me, that's really helpful to say like, no, I have to do my homework because I'm showing up for my other and my fellow readers and reading their work and feeding feedback for them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because in our classes, we workshop our work, and you have to produce for your workshop. It's an opportunity, a golden opportunity to get tons of feedback from people, from disparate writers in the class. And for me, and you're going to show up for that, because that to have taken the course and then not produce and not show up would be self-defeating. So it really is great incentive. Deb, did you want to talk about that at all, about your process, where you found the obstacles, where you found the helpful?
I think that, frankly, I was most most consistently productive when I was in your class, classes, because again, this accountability thing, it was like I was up, so I had to produce something, and and like I told you during our conversation earlier, I came to this with no MFA, no creative writing experience to speak of. I wrote legal briefs, and so it was just really helpful for me just to kind of get exposed to the craft. And that was so helpful. And as I told you, I so appreciate you and then the feedback that I got from the other students in the class. And the support and the encouragement, because as you recall, this book started out as a short story. Okay, just for something here. You want me to write something? Here's a short story. And because you and specifically the other people in the workshop, they said, no. Because the short story ended when Deborah was leaving prison, literally, like the chapter 1. And people were saying like, no, we need to know what happened later when she got out. And so that encouragement kind of forced me to kind of keep up in my game a little bit. And so to me, that was the best experience that I had. After I was no longer in the class, I moved again and these kind of things. I participated in some of the meetups, some were in person, some were online, and I'd occasionally work with, writing groups, but it was sort of spotty, I think, because people didn't have the commitment that they had for the class. But something else that has been very helpful that I've discovered is, because I have to, like, again, I live alone, and I could really get distracted easily. But if I found some resources on YouTube that I consistently kind of followed, whether it was the Film Courage channel, where there's just like really great screenwriters. It's primarily about screenwriting, but the same types of things are discussed, the character arc and just, structure and those kind of things. So they were sort of reinforcing. So when I wasn't actually writing, I could just, if I'm playing video games, I'm still listening. And so then when I did get to my computer and I'm writing, I could hear their voices in my head as I was writing. Is this dialogue? Is it too on the nose? Is whatever. So that was so I was really participating, even though I wasn't writing all the time.
Right. And so I think you're both highlighting what's coming through for both of you is like there's a passion there for this story, and that's why it's so important to find, to land on that topic where your passion can be displayed and applied. And I think I know in your case, Deb, when you were in class and you were, we've got this woman in prison and she's under the spell of this stronger, more powerful long-term inmate, Big Mama. And, she's under that woman's control to a degree, and then she's trying to finesse that, and then she finally gets to leave, and Big Mama's giving her all kinds of advice. And that day that she's released, she goes and she gets on. Everybody was like, we want to know what happens now,
right,
because they were already so invested in her. So the way that you were able to tell us in very, just a few pages, I mean, it's probably 5-6 pages, something like that, get us so invested in this character and her conflict with Big Mama, and how her coping strategies for dealing with that and her motivation, what was continuing to drive her out of the, to drive her out of the prison and into her new life, and so sure that she was going to be able to tackle everything. That is what was so compelling to us as writers.
David,
And
make yourself lunch.
so somebody's speaking. Could you put yourself on mute? So, that was so compelling to us as writers. And so, getting those first, those little hooks into your audience early on are so important. And you already had that because your material was so strong and your identification, I think, with the character was so strong. And I know with Monique, you said it's very hard for you to stop researching. You love to go down those rabbit holes of researching, and, there's just more and more to learn all the time. But I think both of you, what you're saying is that if you pick a topic that truly fascinates and compels you, you will feed it, you will honor it. Even if you may not be writing at this moment, you're doing something to feed that obsession and to keep it alive in your mind, which is what it's all about. Before you get it on the page, it has to be alive in your mind. And you're talking about techniques that allow you to do that. I want to move on to something else. So, each of you, I know, so Monique is working on her new book right now, and she was in my class last quarter. Fascinating, real life figure of this CIA operative during the Vietnam era. And I know, Deborah, you have big plans for your book now that it's been published. So I want to talk to both of you about your next steps for these two books. Deborah, do you want to go ahead and talk about?
Okay, yeah, sure. Like I've mentioned, at this point, I'm actually sharing my book with some local university professors and like Bloomfield College here to possibly be like additional reading, because it's not a classic, it's not a textbook as it were, but additional reading for some of the women's studies courses, the criminology courses, criminal justice, those kind of things. Because I think that and I've also shared it with women's prison advocacy, for women who have been in prison, advocacy groups for them, just for their libraries. And because I think that it's just, kind of a, it kind of would reinforce for them that, you're not alone.
Yeah.
Okay. And people, you can progress through these stages, and there are setbacks, because that's the way it really is, in life, and especially for people who have been incarcerated. Like I learned early on, there's a reason if people follow, this is what, when I first started in parole and probation, and I'd get frustrated when a client wouldn't follow the rules. And I was reminded by my supervisor, I'll never forget, he said, if they followed the rules, they wouldn't be here. So this is part of this, like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and then you sort of, you kind of get used to that. And that's what I tried to, kind of put across in the book. It's like, yeah, she did this really well, but oh Lord, now we have this, so it's just kind of a back and forth kind of thing. So like I said, I'm sharing it with those groups, and I've been encouraged to write, a sequel. Not sure that I have the energy for that. But I've been encouraged to do that. What happens now? Because that's sort of what I'm getting, the feedback that I'm kind of getting. What happens now? So.
Yeah, and the book is very realistic in the way that it ends, and that it's not, I think the little motto for the book, which is on the back of the book, is life is no fairy tale.
You're exactly.
And
exactly.
So even though she accomplishes some of her goals by the end of the book, they are not unqualified. They are not exactly the way that she, expected her wish fulfillment to be. And you leave it in a very kind of an ambiguous place, which I think is very incredibly realistic and intriguing, but it also lends itself very much to a sequel, because you do leave those unanswered questions.
Right. Yeah.
And Monique, I want to ask you, what's for this specific book? I understand you have a film option. You want to talk about that?
Sure. So the book is 10 years old, so it's been out in the world for a while. And I will say, Deborah, did you feel this way too? Like when the book comes out, it's like you're sending your kid off to kindergarten and there's bullies out there and you're so scared. And, you know, I try not to read like the Goodreads or whatever, but like people can be so mean. It is so scary because then your book is out there in the world. And anyways, so
Yeah, I know that feeling, yes.
right. So I published the book with Public Affairs Press. So it was a traditional publisher. So they did have money set aside for the publicity, and they were very nice about it. And I felt like really well taken care of. But when, you know, people that love me read it, they were like, this is a movie. And I was like, you're so right. But everyone I talked to in the publicity business, they were like, you know, they would say they actually in 2013, so 10 years ago, they told me that a Asian cast would not carry American audiences, that there was no market for it, and a female Asian lead would be impossible. So it was all of these, like, frankly, racist reasons why my book wouldn't make it. And I'm just laughing now because Everything Everywhere All at Once just carried like everything in the world. So shows that the world really does change in 10 years. So the book was optioned pretty quickly after it came out. But this stuff, like, things get optioned and not made for years. So the book was optioned, then that option expired, then it was bought again, and it's now in the hands of a really lovely woman named Stacy Reese, who's working with a company. And I got to see one script, which was, I think, not quite there. So now they're redeveloping it and trying to pitch it as a series, which I find so exciting. But again, the odds that this actually like makes it are so slim, because I think a lot of stuff gets optioned and sat on for years.
Yeah, but that's still really exciting. And it's interesting that you were told, back in 2013 that an Asian woman lead, forget it, so things have definitely changed, have progressed over time, when we're glad to see that. And that, if you bring this material into the world, it could eventually reach a bigger audience and sway even more people if you're able to reach that kind of an audience. And I think with Deborah's book, I want to hear about your experiences in self-publishing. But first, I do want to say that, I do think that this book, and certainly any sequel, would really lend itself to a TV, series itself. There's a lot there. So I've encouraged Deborah to look into that avenue. But tell us about your experiences, because you went a different route. You self-published, and the book out there. It's a beautiful book for those of you who haven't seen it. Here it is. Here's the beautiful cover. And Deborah did all this herself. I mean, you had some help that you paid for, other help that was a minimal cost. Tell us about that process.
Yeah, it was less painless than I thought that it would be, because actually I decided probably in November of last year, I have to stop, because I was just going to continue to edit and rewrite. And so it was literally like in November, maybe just early December, that I said, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and self-publish it. And it was not hard. I found a distributor online where I didn't pay anything up front for them to kind of put everything how do you want to say it, like I said, to turn the manuscript into a book form, what that process is called. But I still had to go through and get things that I had no clue about, get the ISBN. I'd already had it copyrighted from a couple of drafts back, but I had to update the copyright. I had to go into the system and pull together keywords and selecting genres and all of those kinds of things. And because I was not familiar with that platform, that was really what was most time consuming, trying to work through those kinds of processes. But other than that, it was not too bad. And I also found, like I had mentioned, I found a cover designer, and I worked with them, and it was only like, I was really kind of surprised, only like $500, and they turned it around in just in less than a week. They essentially asked me, okay, what essentially is the story about? What is a general description of your main character? And they shot me back an email with okay, how does this look? And it's just the way it is on the book cover right now.
Yeah.
And so it was not that difficult. Like, if I had done it before, it would have been easier. The most challenging part was actually going through learning a new platform.
Yeah,
That
understood.
was it.
I know we're getting near to Q&A time, and I want to turn back to you, Conway, and ask, are there questions that you still have that you would like to see addressed before we turn it over to Q&A?
I was actually just wondering if you, Susan, you've been engaging with Deborah and Monique really beautifully, but I also want to give a platform for you to share
Oh,
your
great.
experiences with writing. And I
Sure.
guess my question would be that first question that you posed, which is, how did you come to writing and what was your path to
Yeah.
bringing your stories forward?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Yeah, so it's kind of an unusual journey. I guess every single journey is unique. I was a huge movie buff. Like, I read like a maniac as a kid, and then somewhere all the way through college even. But then somewhere, a little bit later after I got out of college, I'd always loved movies. And a friend of mine went to USC Film School, and she's like, this ain't hard. And I'm like, oh, okay, if you can do it, I can do it. And, I'd had some courses at the University of Chicago with some really good people. Gerald Mass comes to mind, a great theoretician. We saw amazing movies, and I could see that movies were the locus of a whole lot of interesting topics around society and character and emotions and what makes a life and all of these good things. So I went to film school. I went to Columbia College, Chicago. And, I did my student film, and then I got some money after that to shoot an independent film, which I wrote and directed, and we shot it, and it came out, and it got into some festivals around the world, but I was not as happy with it as I could have been. And the reason why, I thought, the cast was great, cinematography was great, the editing was great, my directing was okay, but the story could have been stronger. And so I went on this quest. How can I make this story stronger? I want to do another film, and I want it to be a more compelling story. And I spent a few years researching that. And when I exhausted all of that, I had started teaching for the Graham School then, in screenwriting specifically. This is like 2010. And then fiction writers started coming to my classes and finding the lessons of film very helpful for their own work. And I'd already exhausted all the research and writing in film. And so I started, looking at fiction. What do the experts have to say about fiction writing? And so I was continuing to grow, and I'm working on my, I've had some short stories. I'm working on my first novel. It's a multi-year journey, but it's incredibly satisfying. But basically, I came to fiction writing from a film background. And whenever I got a little lost in my writing, I turned back to the idea of film, which is so concise. It has to have a very, very strong character arc. You've got a limited amount of time on screen, and the lessons that can be derived from that about storytelling are manifold and can be exploited continually over your career. So that's kind of a little bit about how I got into this. And I find that working with other writers just feeds me continually. I learned so much from other writers in my class. I cannot tell you how much I have learned.
Oh, thank you, Susan. So do you want to pause there and then open up for our participants to ask their questions?
Sounds good.
Okay, so we did get a couple of questions in the chat. And so I can start there, but as we move into this next section, if you have joined us today and you have questions for the panel, please add them to the chat and we can read them out. And we can also, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question, we can call on you if you use the raised hand function, which is in reactions at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you should see a button that has a little smiley face and a plus next to it with reactions. You should be able to raise your hand there and add yourself to a queue for the Q&A. So the first question that we have is from Nancy, who asks, can you provide the names of journals to send creative nonfiction for publication?
Any comments on that, you guys? Maybe you don't.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe our audience knows. Maybe somebody in our audience knows.
We did get some comments in the chat. Nancy Pat says the Clifford Garstings 2023 Literary Magazine rankings categories for creative nonfiction, poetry, and fiction. So Clifford Garstings 2023 Literary Magazine might be a place to begin.
And
Is it you say for nonfiction or fiction, or could you repeat the question? Because
Creative nonfiction.
Oh, okay, yeah. I know that at one point I was looking at when this was just a short story. It's pretty easy to to kind of with a Google search find various literary publications that are taking have solicitations for people to submit their work. Some of them are specifically for, creative nonfiction or, fiction or various categories, but you can find, there are lots of them. And some of them have a certain window, and they'll give you the when they're taking submissions and, the categories that they accept and those kind of things.
And one thing just came across my earbuds this morning. There is a podcast that I love. I know some of you on this call already know all about it, but I'm sorry, there's a swear in it. It's called The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. And it's a hilarious podcast. And this morning, I just heard them doing an ad for, in a couple of weeks, they have a guest editor coming on to review nonfiction, specifically nonfiction. So my ears perked up because this is a fiction writers haven podcast. It's amazing, but for nonfiction writers, so check that out.
That's great. I see Swati had a question, and then Marilee Alfdenkamp. Do you want to go, Swati?
Yes, I posted a question. Just if anyone has used beta readers, it's something I've been thinking about. And if they have any best practice or suggestions, whether it's number or how to manage them or how to manage the feedback, I'm just really open to any ideas and comments on that.
Well, I can tell you that I definitely did, but at a different stage in my manuscript process. So I queried an agent, and she was my number one first reader editor, but nonfiction is a little different because you query on a proposal. So it's a very, very detailed proposal. There's a lot of chapter excerpts, and there is some writing in it, but she really helped me with that. And then from there, when I had my actual manuscript, then I sent it out to a couple people that I had been in classes with, my mother, people that went through it with a fine tooth comb, but I got through and so for nonfiction, it might be different, but I got through the agent phase first and then got the beta readers.
I see some other hands. Oh, do you have a comment?
No, go ahead. No, go right ahead. Because I did not have a beta reader. I had, editors, but a couple of freelance editors who kind of served it as that function, but not a beta reader.
Okay, so Marilee, did you want to go?
Sure. Monique, how did you convince Madame New to say yes to being interviewed?
Oh, it was a cat and mouse game. She decided that I had been sent from heaven, so I just went along with that for a while. But there's a lot of serendipity in our relationship, and so she took that as a sign from God. But she actually didn't end up ever meeting me in person. She got to kind of cold feet at the last minute, other signs from God, I don't know. So it was kind of this, the book is actually about that like cat and mouse game that she played with me, which was, give me some information and then send me on a quest to go find something else for her. So she used me and I was happy to be used.
I see an interesting question coming in from Ann Moore. Talk about your craft. Longhand on legal pads or a computer? What time of day? Do you aim for a length per day? How and when do you revise? So just all kinds of your actual writing craft and practice.
Well, for me, I'm a plotter. I'm not a pantser. So when I initially start, I use a legal pad and I sort of outline the chapters or the kinds of things where the story is going to go. That changed, all the time. But that's on a legal pad. But after that, everything is on a computer, and I would set aside. I would convince myself for a week or two that I was going to write, from 9 to 12 every morning, and I was going to do it. And I stuck to it for a few days. And then I would sort of say, okay, now I have to pack my things up and go to the library and sit and do it. And I would do that for a while. But, it took 5 years before this whole thing was done. So I just kind of changed back and forth. So like I said, mostly everything was on computer. And I did not have a set schedule. I probably could have finished quicker if I had, but I'm retired. And I've I've told Susan, I've lived in like 3 different states since I started writing this. So I'm not so I've kind of slacked off and then I'll come back to it, but it's always been in my head though. It's always there. So that was one reason I said by the end of last year, I said, I'm not going to go into the next year with this. I'm actually going to finish this because I've been carrying it around so long. And I don't remember what the other part that you asked. You asked about the legal pad or the process. Was there something else or?
Do you aim for a length per day, and how and when do you revise?
I didn't aim for a length per day. I aimed for a number of pages, maybe the number of pages per day.
Okay.
And in terms of revising, I revised, constantly. I would go through the whole thing, and then I would go through and okay, today I'm going to revise chapter 1. And today I'm going to revise chapter 2 and 3 because they were shorter, but I was constantly revising. And then when I got an editor, the first editor that I had, that editor gave me feedback and I made revisions based on that. And then I got another editor, same kind of thing. So I was rewriting. It was not just one revision. And then as I thought of things, and with my revision process, as I would just kind of learn new things from research and this kind of thing, I would just sort of make notes on a kind of my revision task list that when I go through the revise, I pick this up and be sure to include this in chapter 7. Go through and change this in chapter 8 or whatever, so that I always, when I did a revision, I could go ahead and incorporate everything that it was all the revisions were in one place so that I could be sure not to lose those.
Yeah. And Monique, do you want to speak to any of that? And also we have a question. How did you find an agent for your nonfiction book?
Okay, I would like a schedule. I would just like to say I would like a schedule, and I would like everybody to leave me the hell alone and close my door, but life does not work out like that. And so I tend to, there are orthodontist appointments or whatever it is. So my goal for myself is so ridiculous. It's like write 50 words a day. And if I can set my bar so low, then I have to meet it, because that's just right. Like I just said more than 50 words in a sentence. So that just works for me. And I've found that is true for me, whether it's exercise or whatever. Once I just get my butt in a chair and I give myself that ridiculously tiny goal, then often I'll keep going. And if I don't, it's okay, because I can still tell myself I met my goal. And then the other thing that's different now versus 10 years ago is, and maybe that's why this isn't going so well, I'm using this writing software. It's called Scrivener, and it is like a digital notebook. So for all of my research, I have it all online. I'm going to throw up even talking about it, but last year my computer was stolen out of my car and I hadn't backed it up to the web, and oh my God, it was a nightmare. But the idea of these like cork boards and all my research in one place is very appealing. But I really love and think I retain better when I write things out by hand. Then I'm like, not search, like I have gone back through my Scrivener notebook and I will find I've taken the same note like 3 times because it doesn't stick in my head the same way as it does long form. I wonder if I'm just a wacky animal that way, or if everybody's the same. But so jury's out on whether this is not a knock against Scrivener. It is just my process is changing and I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, and sorry, how did I find an agent?
Yes.
I queried and I was rejected. So I could only query like 3 at a time because I can't handle, again, set my bar super low. I couldn't handle that much rejection at once. So I was probably rejected like by 15 agents before I found the one. So I think in the terms of like finding an agent, I'm hearing that that's like a pretty good hit rate, but I really, my agent on her website said she was looking for obscure characters. And I was like, oh, have I got an obscure character for you? So that really helped. And she's been a great fit for me. So.
That's fantastic. Yeah, lots of query letters. Yeah, volume, right?
And it's so scary. I look back at the first query letter I sent and it was so bad. So maybe you should have like a perfect query letter and then send it out to 100 people. But for me, it was like, and sometimes in the rejections, they were nice and they said why they rejected me. And so then that's helpful because then you can go back and revise your query letter. So I don't know, but yeah. I could only like be on pins and needles for like 3 people at once. And then I could move on to the next batch.
Yeah, just like everything else in the writing field, it's a learning journey. You learn how to do query letters. It's an art form in and of itself, just like pitches.
Yeah.
I got a couple other questions here. I have, how do you manage writing about actual people without offending or getting in legal territory? So I know that Monique has a lot to say about that. Let's just see what this last one is. Well, go ahead and let's talk about that.
Okay.
You shared with me some of the challenges of writing about an actual person. And also I want to give your official Vietnam version of the novel story too, please.
Oh, right.
Awesome.
So if the person you're writing about is in the public domain, it's open to you is my understanding and how people have advised me. So Madame New was famous enough that I was able to write about her. The guy that I'm writing about now is less famous. He's not a household name, but there's his records are in the archives. He was outed by the Pentagon Papers. So his family, this particular story, his family has not been psyched that I'm writing this book. They've recently come around and said they might help me. But I'm sort of jury's out on that. And Madame New's family had very strong feelings because a diary was found when they fled the palace in the coup. Madame New's diary was left behind and someone had it and I got access to it, and her family was really upset about that because it was they felt it was her intellectual property. And so there's been a lot of debate about, I don't excerpt it. I sort of summarize it and talk about the diary, but I never put like chunks of text in there because that's all, it's a hot issue right now. And then how else to write about real people? I think history helps, like going back in time versus writing about somebody now.
Yeah. And what about the South Vietnam? What about the official version of your novel? Tell us about that.
Yes, my book was banned in Vietnam because I said something in the history, which is well accepted in academic circles, which is that China helped the North Vietnamese. China helped the North Vietnamese with funding, with all sorts of things. That China helped the North Vietnamese. And I said that in my book, and my translator called me and was like, I don't really understand. Are you sure? And I was like, no, I'm sure. Like, leave it in there. The translator got in so much trouble. My book was banned. They pulled it from the shelves, and they had to rewrite it. And my Vietnamese is not good enough to like totally know what they could be saying anything they want in that book. And I'm not the first writer that's had this happen to them. But it's kind of a bummer. However, it was a bestseller in Vietnam for a little bit. So whatever they replaced it with was,
That is fascinating. Let's see what else came in. Somebody just asked if connections were the key issue, the key to being published traditionally. So do you have to quote unquote know somebody? And I'm gonna open, yeah, and Monique's saying no. She's saying no. And I also think, in terms of Deborah's situation, I mean, obviously, I don't think your situation was that you needed connections either, but that you actually are finding the connections that you already had in your life with people in your field, in the criminal justice field, that was incredibly helpful to you and could even be helpful, as you mentioned before, in placing your book in academic programs devoted to criminal justice issues. So there are other, do you have to know people to make it? I think that's the question on the table. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Well, for me, I pretty much knew going in that I was just not up for going through, querying and, kind of going the traditional publishing route, because I just did not want to. I felt like I had invested enough time already, and I did not want to have to start, going through the gatekeepers and saying, please, okay, please. I said, no, I'm just gonna do it myself. And the other reason is too, and I don't know this, but I just sort of heard and read that with traditional publishing anyway, I mean, you don't make a lot of money on books, okay? I think that everybody knows that. And with traditional publishing, you make even less than you would with self-publishing, per book. So I said, if I'm going to make small change, I'll do it myself. I'm not going to, go the traditional route. I'm not going to, like I said, have to go through the, get the agent, get the, the publishing house, go through all of that, and then not make a whole lot of money. Because I was writing primarily because I just wanted to get the story told. And I started writing it, like I said, just for the class. So it's not like I was trying to, kind of start this career in writing. I started this project, for your class. And so I just wanted to, and once I was sort of invested in it, I said, I really want to get this story told. And so, and I also knew, just from what I'd learned about the industry and storytelling and the like, that I would have to craft the book so that it met, various standards for various genres and this kind of thing. And I said, I want to tell the story my way, and I don't want to be in a situation where I'm kind of twisting and turning and doing what needs to be done so that it would, be accepted by a publishing house. So yeah, that's sort of my story.
Yeah, I mean, we have to wrap up pretty quickly here, but Monique, would you say that you needed to have connections to make it, or just go the usual route, like the query?
Well, I think in other countries, it works other ways. So in France, for example, you don't need an agent. You can just go directly to the publishing house. But I will say, in terms of like knowing someone, if you live in the United States and you're looking for an American publisher, you do need an agent. They are like the gatekeeper. And maybe an academic press, you can get around that. But if you're looking for a traditional publisher, then you do need an agent in the United States.
And so you have to do query letters to the agent. right?
Exactly. So if that's what, so like, if that helps answer the question, like, do you need to know somebody? No, you don't, but you do need to find someone who does, because then
Right.
they shop your book around to all the publishing houses, and that's how that works.
Awesome. Well, I had a few questions about where can they find out more about our programs, and it's basically just grahamschool.uchicago.edu, correct? Grahamschool. I put it in the
That's
chat.
right. That's right. It's in the chat. And maybe just as a closing piece, Monique and Deborah, you can say where we can find your books if we want to read.
Okay, well, my book is available. It's available on Amazon. It's available Barnes and Noble, Apple, Smashwords, just a various, it's out there. Literally, if you just put Deborah Spring, in the Google search box, you'll find it.
Wonderful.
And I local bookstores used to carry me, but I think the book is too old now. So you can find me probably on Amazon and the bigger channels. And then a plug for the second book that I co-wrote. This is not my story, but I was hired to write this guy's story, and he's got a great story. That's about the fall of Saigon, and it's another nonfiction. But I wrote it as his memoir. So from the I perspective. So check that one out. It's called They Are All My Family, and it's John Reardon with me.
Thank you so much to both of you for coming in and sharing your experiences. I hope that your experience can help other writers navigate, getting this done and then getting it out there. It seems like you have a lot to say that will be very helpful for many of us, I believe.
Well,
thank
thanks
you
so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Keep teaching,
Absolutely.
Susan. You teach great classes, and there's so much to learn. So big plug for your classes and all the classes at the Graham School that keep us on track.
Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you all so much.
Agree
for joining us
100%.
today.
Okay. Thank
Thank
you.
you all. Bye now.
Bye.